Hello, welcome to our newest shared adventure, the beginning of a journey through this book. I'd like to take this opportunity to show you the edition I'll be following, published by Pensamento. I've heard that it's not so easy to find, which seems to be a common trend with the books I recommend. Almost as if people always tell me that as soon as I recommend a book, it disappears. But these are books that, unfortunately, in today's world, are not highly valued. They are not trendy books. So, unfortunately, publishers are not interested in producing, re-releasing, or creating new editions, which is a mistake because this is one of the books I believe we should not go without reading. A classic, a sacred book. So, I recommend that you take a look around. You might find other editions. This one seems very good to me. I also take this opportunity, before we begin our lectures, to inform all our listeners who have been visiting my library that not all the books here are personally recommended by me. I did not place these books here for promotional purposes. It is a personal library. Some of these books I haven't even read yet, and others I didn't like that much. So, the book recommendations are the ones available on YouTube. Do not take my library as a recommendation, as a grand book suggestion. I am truly welcoming you into my home without any filter. I did not curate the books that are here. These are the books I have, but they are not necessarily the best ones I have read. Well, returning to our topic, today we will talk about the Dhammapada, about this beautiful tradition that is Buddhism, and its book, considered the most important, the sacred book par excellence of the Buddhist tradition. We will begin. It has 26 chapters. Today, we will probably cover the first 4, and then we will continue at whatever pace is possible. This will be a shared journey. I hope this will take about 6 or 7 more lectures, and I hope that, as always, you will follow along by reading, because that is the purpose. My commented readings are not meant to promote a publishing house or to advertise any product, but rather to foster a state of awareness within you. Promoting what is most beautiful there in my life. So, I hope you can follow along with the reading. So, welcome to the Dhammapada. Siddhartha Gautama. We have a lecture about him on our new Acropolis YouTube channel, and it is a very good one, by the way. The Buddha, the historical Buddha, has a remarkable and beautiful story that is well worth knowing. We will not discuss it here. We will not stray too far from our focus. Yes, he is the founder of Buddhism. The maxims of the Dhammapada come from him, but the story we are focusing on is the history of the book Dhammapada. Siddhartha Gautama, a remarkable teacher who lived in the 6th century BC. It is believed, based on approximate dates, that he was born in 563 BC. In addition, in the Lumbini Plains, in what is now Nepal, as his mother, Maya Devi, was walking toward her parents' home to give birth to her child. Moreover, he is believed to have passed away at the 80 years of age in Kushinagara, and that was in 483 years BC. From that point on, a series of councils took place, the first of which firmly established the Sutta Pitaka and Vinaya Pitaka, which are 2 of the texts that would come to be known as the Tripitaka, from which the Dhammapada originates. And later, in the 3rd council, the 3rd text was established, known as the Abhidhamma Pitaka. Tripitaka literally means 3 baskets. There was a tradition among monks during the rainy season to retreat and record the teachings of their masters. For a long time, it was not written down. It was transmitted through oral tradition. However, it is said that the Dhammapada began to be written, and the Tripitaka started to be recorded on palm leaves and placed in these baskets around the year 250 BCE, during the 3rd council of Pataliputra. And later, around 50 to 70 BCE, it was transcribed into Pali, the more recent language. From within this Tripitaka, the 3 baskets where the teachings were placed. There was the Vinaya Pitaka, which is a book of instructions for monks, the Sutta Pitaka, which is a collection of ethical teachings of Buddhist doctrine, and the Abhidhamma Pitaka, which contains a series of philosophical reflections and interpretations on the doctrine. The Sutta Pitaka, which is said to have been recited by Buddha's own cousin and disciple, Sutta Pitaka contains within it 5 collections of texts. One of these, called the Khaddaka Nikaya, includes 15 books. And one of these books is our Dhammapada. This is just for reference, just to provide context, so that you understand how it all began. This transcription, which I often mention in various lectures, follows a common pattern in historical traditions. During times when physical life becomes less active, such as in autumn and winter, people turn inward to focus on their inner lives, whereas in spring and summer, external life takes precedence. Thus, monks often write down their sacred texts during the autumn and winter seasons. Amidst the rains and the cold, they retreat and write down the teachings of the Master. So here we are, moving from the Tripitaka to the Sutta Pitaka tradition and the Dhammapada, which is our focus. The Dhammapada consists of a collection of books and chapters, which total 26, as we have mentioned, with approximately 400 and some verses. Today, we will explore a few of the first ones. It would not be possible for us to read all 400 verses, nor would it be necessary. One of the characteristics of the Dhammapada is that, on some occasions, it can be somewhat repetitive. Each chapter has a central theme, and the verses often reinforce one another. This does not mean that you should not read all of them. And it also does not mean that, at times, you might not prefer other verses over the ones I have selected. I will simply make a selection and comment on a few verses that I believe provide a good tone for understanding that chapter. The first chapter, which is about the twin verses, or Yama Kavaga, has a strong focus on the nature of the mind. Do you remember from our Kybalion, where we began with the idea of the principle of mentalism, that the universe is mental? Buddhism, then, speaks of the mind preceding matter and of the mental forms of human beings shaping their own histories. In other words, what we experience today is the result of what we thought yesterday, and thus life moves forward. So, the twin verses begin by addressing precisely this idea of thought. First, what we think today is what we will be tomorrow. Our life is a creation of our mind. Understand that this universal principle offers us profound insight. The possibility, the freedom to hold the reins of our own lives in our hands. What we mentally construct today is what we will experience tomorrow. Our projections, our plans, and sometimes even the unconscious elements of our frustrations, disappointments, and resentments, all of this creates a form of accountability, a pursuit of things in the days to come. Sometimes we fail to realize that what we do today was programmed at some point in the past, something unresolved. If we had a very clear awareness of the consequences of our thoughts in our practical lives, we would begin a necessary practice of mastering our minds, which would even grant us a profound state of peace of mind, because at its core, inner life is the mastery of the mind. When we manage to bring a certain order, a certain focus to this inner world, we find peace, we find serenity. As it is said in The Light on the Path, we have the flower that blooms after the storm. The second verse states, "If a man speaks or acts with a pure mind, happiness follows him like his inseparable shadow." In other words, a pure mind will bring peace, coherence, and happiness. What does he mean to be happy? To be in harmony with himself. The adversities of the external world are not capable of disturbing this inner world, which only he governs. He is absolutely sovereign. Remember, we have often spoken about the philosophical school of Stoicism, especially Roman Stoicism, when they stated that there are things that depend on us and things that do not. We should only be unhappy about what depends on us and what we failed to do. External circumstances require the necessary strength to endure them, but the internal ones. They deeply affect us when we fail in what was our responsibility. And all internal circumstances arise from the way we think about life. In other words, our thinking, as the ancients used to say, is the workshop of our life. A verse to reflect upon. He insulted me, mistreated me, lowered me, robbed me. Those who harbor such thoughts will not be freed from hatred and resentment. In other words, those who nurture thoughts of bitterness, thoughts of victimization, which we have spoken about so much, as it has become a terrible habit today, will find that this remains an unresolved burden in their lives forever. Forever believing that external factors justify not pursuing their dreams, not fulfilling their life's purpose. This becomes a crutch for weakness. In other words, I didn't do it. Why? Because certain people prevented me. I didn't do it. Why? Because certain circumstances stood in my way. Well, what about those who faced far worse circumstances and still succeeded? So, our mindset, our resilience, our ability or inability to overcome adversity is our own responsibility. We must not use external factors as a crutch. Those who nurture this kind of thinking become stuck in life. Remember that I really like that very relevant book, which I even took a course on Pressfield's The War of Art, where he discusses these rationalizations that prevent us from pursuing our dreams, portraying them as weapons of resistance. And here, we find Deep Roots, a classic book, conveying the same idea. Hatred will never be defeated by hatred. Hatred is only extinguished by love. This is an eternal law. In other words, remember the Kybalion and the principle that states hatred and love are, in fact, different vibrations of a single continuum emotion. We must understand that when we seek to transmute a feeling of hatred into love, it does not necessarily mean transforming it into passion. I do not need to bring that person or situation too close into my life. I do not need to coexist with them all the time. I simply need to start seeing them as a complex being, one who may indeed have flaws, but also possesses numerous other qualities. By understanding how to set the right distance and pace, I can learn a great deal from them, and I can also teach them a lot. By maintaining the right distance and pace, we are able to see things in a more sober and balanced way. And we begin to realize that the entire world is dual. This person would not be an exception. This circumstance would not be an exception either. Simply because of a negative feeling, I blocked my view of the other side. There is another side. I can practice every time a criticism arises in my mind, seeking the positive aspects of that same person, of that same circumstance. And in this way, I gradually neutralize hatred through love. Not passion, but a balanced, sober love, one that knows how to maintain the necessary distance and rhythm to harmonize with everything. This should be our pursuit. Remember, I am a philosopher. I do not possess wisdom. In this, too, I have struggled, just like you. I do not speak of what I already have, but of what I am striving to attain. I do not own any absolute truth. What sets a philosopher apart from an ordinary person is simply the spirit of self-improvement. In other words, they are defeated but rise to fight again. But that does not mean I do not struggle, just like you, against the same challenges. A philosopher is not a sage. They are simply someone with an unyielding spirit of self-improvement. They fall 1,000 times and rise 1,001. I too struggle against these same things. 6. Many do not know that we are in this world to live in harmony, forgetting that they will die one day. For those who meditate on this, there are no divergences, and life becomes gentler. Reflecting on this is a remarkable element. I work a lot with this when I teach, for example, time management, which is an incredibly philosophical course where I say, look, do you want to plan your time? Great. Start by considering life as a whole. Know where you want to go with all of this. Understand what will truly matter at the end of the road. Start with the big picture. Then, gradually frame the smaller ones, looking at the decade, the year, the month, and finally today. But thinking big allows us to appreciate things in their proper proportion. It helps us assign the right value and the appropriate weight to each circumstance. Harmony is achieved when we think on a grand scale. When we think small, we drown in a glass of water because we simply shrink to its size. So, when we consider life as a whole, we realize that harmony is fundamental and holds a value far greater than our own. Small vanities and prides, wounded egos and somewhat trivial resentments. We find the right proportion to handle each situation, the just path, where everything is handled in the right proportion, at the right pace, and with the right distance, so that all things come into harmony. He who lives only in search of pleasures, idle, uncontrolled in the senses, intemperate in eating, is dominated by Mara, temptation, like weak trees are blown down by the wind. Understand, there is a difference between having pleasures. Another thing is to be a slave to pleasures. So much so that when pleasure moves elsewhere, I abandon my path to chase after it. Like that old phrase I always quote from Sri Ram, where he says, "I walk toward my goal, I walk toward my ideal. If a gentle breeze blows, I delight in the gentle breeze. If there is a scorching sun, I go along with this scorching sun. But neither one nor the other takes me off my path. I do not go running after it either." Those who chase after pleasures will find their life to be nothing more than a mere collection of pleasures, of fleeting moments, which, in the end, may always leave a bitterness in the mouth, because they were not worth the price you paid for them. Too fleeting, too inconsistent. So, having pleasures, we are not medieval, nor do we wish to impose any code of temptations and austerities here. It is simply about understanding where we want to go, and not allowing elements that are not bad in themselves, but too frivolous, to steal us away from the things that truly hold value. At its core, this is also about time management, the idea of prioritizing what is important over what is urgent, pleasant, or merely sensory. Placing what we understand above what we merely feel. The senses are good, they are necessary, and they serve as tools that bring us many insights. But be careful not to let them become our masters. They weren't meant for that. And finally, verse 12 in this first chapter states that whoever recognizes the real as real and illusion as illusion with certainty will attain the truth. Notice that when we grasp this vast dimension of time and understand where we want to go with it, who we are, and what we seek to build within ourselves, we develop a sense of reality. A reality that we can contrast with fleeting elements, which are often detours from the path that consume precious time. Time is life, and they steal from us a time that they are not worth. Knowing the specific value of each thing, understanding how to invest our time, our life requires us to have a broad perception of time. We must desire to know what is real and cultivate a deep love for it. And for that, we must confront the meaning of our lives with fleeting things. Those who grasp the notion of reality understand that the highest reality we can attain is where we want to go with our lives. What do we want to contribute to the world? Do we want to leave this place greater than when we arrived? Do we want to make a difference in the world and in ourselves, even if just a small one? Do we want to be a force for growth? That is what is real. And with that understanding, we must confront all the fleeting circumstances of life. 13, in the same way that rain penetrates a poorly thatched house, passions invade the poorly guarded mind. A poorly guarded mind is scattered, lacking focus. It does not know where it wants to go, so any distraction can enter and steal it from itself. Remember, our identity is connected to our sense of purpose in life. Who am I? I am Lucia. Who is Lucia? She is the one who seeks to become more just, more balanced, and more fraternal than she is today, by the end of her life. That is who I am. I cannot forget who I am and confuse myself with fleeting elements. This represents a poorly covered house, full of gaps, where the rain will seep in. So, when sensory and trivial elements pass through my mind, if I know who I am, I look at them and say, there goes a trivial thought. The trivial thought is passing by, there is the trivial thought. I do not chase after it. I know how to distinguish what belongs to me and what does not within my mind. It is said that great sages prevent what is unhealthy, unproductive, and inconsistent with their principles from entering their mental space. Well, we are not them. We are not great sages. We must learn to recognize within our minds, among everything that is there, who we truly are and what does not belong to us. Remember that definition of intelligence intelligere, to choose among to constantly discern within my mental space what belongs to me and what does not. and to let go of what does not belong, merely observing it as something that floats through the mind without forming attachments or identifying with it. Be a mindful mind. This ensures that you are not influenced by what is not truly yours. Now, who truly has a mindful mind? It is a matter of practice. It is like a muscle. Today, we are living in the most distracted time in history, I believe. There is no record of a time when people were more scattered than they are today. Because unhappiness and existential anguish are lack of a clear sense of purpose, cause anything to become a distraction that keeps us from truly encountering ourselves. And society produces a whole amount of distractions, enough to keep a human being disconnected from themselves for an entire lifetime. Look at how we get absorbed in anything on a computer, on the internet. The internet steals an hour from you just like that. Before you even realize it, an hour, 2, 3 have passed. In other words, distractions of all kinds. Never before have we had a society that offered so much. So, if you want to escape from yourself, there are countless ways to do so. There needs to be a pact between you and yourself, with your destiny, with your sense of purpose in life, and a focused attention on that. As the saying goes, you must keep your eye on the ball. Because if you lose sight of the ball, there are 300 other things in your field of vision, in the stands, at the gate, in every corner, there are 300 distractions. Things that can divert your attention, sometimes to the point of no return. These detours can be dangerous and difficult to come back from. They can turn into addictions. Finally, for this first chapter, verse 20. Speak and recite little of the sacred texts, but practice them, freeing oneself from greed, anger, and all illusion, with true wisdom, with a mind free from the bonds of this world or any other. In truth, this man participates in the holy life. See how powerful this is. In that context, after all, Buddhism emerged during a period of Hinduism's decline. There was already the idea of a person repeating sacred words to themselves constantly, as if this, in some way, could penetrate their soul and generate a state of consciousness. Remember that phrase I always repeat: you do not live by what you eat, but by what you assimilate. So, repeating sacred phrases without assimilating any of it, without bringing it into your life, is like a passage from a sacred book that speaks of the soup and the spoon. It says that sometimes a person perceives truths the way a spoon perceives the taste of soup. In other words, it is in contact with it, but perceives nothing, whereas the tongue, with just a mere touch, perceives the taste of the soup. So, it's not just a matter of proximity, or memorizing, or reciting a sacred verse 1,000 times, but rather taking it and carrying it into your life. Today, I will walk with this verse from the Dhammapada. Until I find an echo of it within myself, I will not let it go. I want to find an echo in my life how this manifests, what practical meaning it holds for me. Many times, I take a book like this and carry it in my bag for months on end. Until I can decode it, translate it into my life as a practice, I won't let it go, because reading it 300 times is not enough. That means nothing. It's like the spoon and the soup. So, let's move on to the second chapter, which is the Appamada Vagga, which deals with merit. In reality, it speaks about vigilance. And verse number 25 says the following: through effort, reflection, vigilance, and self-control, the wise man becomes an island, never submerged by the waves. Notice that what is within is also outside, what is above is also below, as in Kybalion. If within me I hold the fundamental truths, which is where I want to arrive, the existence of Dharma, the existence of karma, the necessity of controlling them. Mental forms that come from outside, controlling the structures of my own personality so that they do not become distractions, so that they do not work against me. In other words, the cardinal points of life. If I remain attentive to this, I know where I want to go. There will be nothing external that can submerge my identity. And if my identity does not allow itself to be submerged from within, then no external circumstances will be capable of overwhelming my determination toward my path. It is said that in ancient martial arts schools, often within Buddhism itself, some of the oldest masters would walk along a line while several disciples attempted to do the same. This would cause them to falter. The disciples would stumble, entangle themselves, while the master would pass through the commotion and continue on his way. In other words, a person who has focus, who is centered, and does not allow anything within to submerge their identity, will also remain steadfast externally. It will be very difficult for anyone to shake them. In other words, where there is a will, there is a way. And where there is a path and a determined traveler with focus, nothing can stop them. Thus, vigilance is a fundamental element first within, and then externally. What follows is merely a consequence. 29. Watchful among the inattentive, awake among the indolent. The wise man advances swiftly like a swift horse, leaving behind a poor plow horse. In other words, vigilant among the inattentive, awake among the asleep. I have told you several times that there are many ways you can stand out. Either many are lying on the ground, drawing attention as a crowd, or a single person stands upright. That person stands out as well. We are not seeking to stand out, but rather the ability to ensure that nothing and no one robs us of ourselves. And this is essential, as he says, to remain standing, attentive, and focused, knowing where we want to go with all of this. Identity comes from a sense of purpose in life, and seeking tools that align with our sense of purpose, allowing us to move forward. In other words, being attentive to both the purpose and the path. Constantly striving to bring the best tools to light. As we always talk about in fairy tales, the prince who sets out to rescue the princess from the dragon. He remains attentive to everything along the way that might help him carry out this task more effectively. In passage 31, still discussing diligence, it says, "The monk who buys into vigilance and knows the danger of negligence advances on the path like fire, burning small and large obstacles." In negligence, our vices take hold. In negligence, our negative thoughts arise, sometimes absorbed from our surroundings, sometimes created by ourselves. In negligence, all forms of disorder infiltrate every aspect of our being. In other words, a poorly closed door will, sooner or later, allow something undesirable to enter. We lack proper control over what has the power to shape our identity. Notice, there are two ways you can. For example, if I want to dominate a people, I have two options. Either I go there and subtly infiltrate their community, introducing ideas that are foreign to their nature and identity. This leads them to reject their own traditions, their own symbols, their own folklore, ultimately causing them to lose their sense of self. Or you infiltrate their mental space, and you start making them feel ashamed of everything that belongs to their identity. In other words, you either act on the physical level or on the mental level. This happens quite often, and just the other day, I witnessed it. It was 2018, and we had just come out of a World Cup. We lost. I was driving my car down the street, and I saw a flag, the kind people attach to their car trunks, which had been torn off and was lying in the middle of the avenue. I couldn't stop, but it was very sad to see that. The flag was all dirty, completely torn, and being tossed around by the passing cars. I kept thinking, the person who threw that in the middle of the road doesn't realize the harm they caused to themselves and to an entire nation, as it is a deeply structuring symbol. A symbol represents our identity. Disrespecting symbols makes us lose confidence, not only in ourselves as a nation, but also in each of us as individuals. It gradually erodes the foundations of our identity. So, one of the fundamental elements to staying on the right path and, like fire, overcoming adversity is taking care of our identity. And when it is represented by symbols, taking care of our symbols. Be mindful of the things we undervalue. It is terrible that our national symbols, for example, are so often vandalized and mistreated, because this profoundly affects the psyche of every human being who is part of it. Under the protection, under the shelter of this symbol. Think about it, reflect on this for a moment. So, guarding our identity and our sense of purpose, and staying on the path. Staying on the path externally is a consequence of remaining attentive to the path within. There is no other way. The deeper within, the more it reflects outward. The old maxim we have already mentioned, the opposite is very difficult. There may be training to walk the external path, but within, there is no true conviction. Well, the first new idea that arises will take you off the path. The third chapter of thought mentions the wave. Let's look at verse 33. In the same way that the archer makes arrows that are straight, the wise man corrects his uncertain and unstable mind, difficult to guard and direct. In other words, we wake up in the morning and clean our house. We take care of the dog, tidy up the area, organize the kitchen. We should also have an internal protocol to observe the state of our mind. In fact, I have often told you that the way we wake up in the morning matters a good piece of music, a meaningful reading, even if brief, just a page or a paragraph. We should take a moment to organize our mind so that we start the day with everything in order, with our thoughts at the highest possible level, focused on elevated and noble ideas that inspire us throughout the day. Thus, the practice of correcting our mind whenever it strays necessarily involves paying attention to what is happening within it. I have spoken about this in several lectures, and those who follow my work are well aware of it. On one occasion, I gave an exercise to my students of philosophy at New Acropolis. I asked them, "Are you critical thinkers?" No, no one considered themselves critical. No one was. In a classroom of 20 people, there wasn't a single critical thinker, an astonishing phenomenon. So I asked them to stop 3 times a day and observe where their mind was at that moment. 3 times a day, they had to note the time. At 8 in the morning, noon, and 6 in the evening, they were to observe where their mind was wandering. And after a week, most of them, those who had the courage to tell me, said, "Look, every time we stopped, my mind was criticizing something or someone." Do you realize what it means to not even know where your mind is? We become so inattentive that we don't even know what we think about throughout the day. Do you know what you thought about today? How many times did you criticize something or someone? What kind of thoughts did you have? In other words, paying attention and being vigilant to know where our mind is. Sometimes we don't even have that. We lack a clear awareness of what passed through our minds, through our emotions, throughout the day. Watching over our mind, lifting it up every time it starts to fall, being attentive to what truly matters in our lives, being aware of reality. Where do we want to go with all of this? A single day is not so little that we can afford to waste it. Remember, we live for 70, 80 years. Within such a context, a single day is significant. If we lived for 80,000 years, perhaps it wouldn't be as much. But in such a short life, a single day is precious. Where did your mind wander today? How much did you move closer to your ideal, to your true identity today? If not, why? Because the factor that held you back today, that led you astray today, if you pay attention to it, you can overcome it tomorrow. Otherwise, it will steal tomorrow from you as well. In other words, attention and vigilance allow us to move forward like fire. 36. The mind is invisible and subtle, difficult to guard, running where it pleases. Let the wise man guard it. Guarded, it is a source of happiness. Thus, we must know how to gain greater and greater control over it. I tell my legs, "Take me to the wall," and they obey. I tell my emotions, "Feel this now," and they do not obey. I tell my mind, "Think about this," and it does not comply. I find it amusing, those little cubicles they place inside university libraries so that students can sit there, see only their book, and study. But soon enough, you'll notice, the cubicles are covered with writings. The student sits there and ends up reading the things written on the cubicle. Haven't you experienced this? I have. I find that intriguing. Why are we always escaping, always seeking ways to evade? There is a great resistance to fully committing ourselves to what each moment requires of us. Learning to discipline this mental distraction, practicing concentration, reminding ourselves daily of what truly matters, and making a well-structured plan for our time. In other words, training the mental muscles to develop a basic level of control that prevents you from losing one day after another due to distraction. What did I do? A bunch of things. How many of them were the ones you actually needed to do? None. You lost your day. You wandered aimlessly. Perhaps you even did things that had some usefulness. But if they weren't aligned with what you were supposed to do, they were still a waste of time. And this is, in fact, one of the justifications. We do a lot of things. But this was important. If it was important, why wasn't it part of your plan? If it wasn't, it's because it wasn't a priority. It wasn't the right time to do it. Be mindful of the excuses we create to justify our distractions. 40. Considering this fragile body as a clay jar, we transform the mind into a fortress, overcoming Mara, temptation, with the wisdom sword. After victory, the achievement is sustained through constant vigilance. So, do not think that we are strong because of our body. Our body is extremely fragile. As it is said, a clay vessel. Epictetus, who was a Stoic philosopher, used to say, "Protect your mind, and it will protect you." What can truly protect us is attentiveness, elevated awareness, and intelligence. These are phenomena that only occur when the mind is focused and awakened. Beyond that, we are merely a leaf at the mercy of the wind. Whether the day will be good or disastrous depends on the wind, not on you. You become a puppet in the hands of natural circumstances, or at times, even unnatural ones. So, be cautious of this. The greatest stronghold we have, and our only guarantee, is to remain attentive. We have a basic level of control over our mind. Our body guarantees us nothing. It is far more fragile than we imagine, transient, full of limitations. Our mind must watch over the body, never the other way around. The priority is the mental plane, where everything is born and everything can be sustained. In other words, to conquer oneself and maintain vigilance. Never relinquish it. We have nothing that is definitively conquered. If today you are someone who has overcome, for example, laziness, be careful, because tomorrow it will come chasing after you again. And in a moment of inattention, it settles back in. So life is a torment. No, life is not a torment. We must see vigilance as something positive. We must see this daily self-conquest as something good. I recently spoke about this in a lecture. A child loves going to a park, riding a Ferris wheel, a roller coaster, enjoying the adventure. A young person who plays a game enjoys increasing levels of difficulty, enjoys the adventure. Why don't you like it? Because we don't enjoy the adventure of constantly fighting against distraction. That is a true hero. More than the one who defeats 1,000 men in battle, it is the one who conquers themselves. Ultimately, this is the great adventure of our lives. I loved it, because otherwise, life truly does become a torment. Enjoy the art of living as a human being. Realize that this is the best we can do for ourselves and for all those we love around us. 41. It won't be long before this body lies on the ground, abandoned, lifeless, unconscious, insensitive, like a useless dry branch. But the consequences of their thoughts will not perish. The good will engender good actions, and the evil will engender evil actions. This, which is a widely used example in Hinduism as well, is something quite concerning. Notice, first of all, that the idea of life's brevity is constantly used as motivation, not as a bogeyman. Death is not used to instill fear, but to call man back to his center. He does not waste time because time is fleeting. Death was not used as something frightening, but as a good companion to remind us of what we must do. Now, what he says that even after the body has died, ideas continue to act in the world is something serious to consider. They continue to act and generate karma. In other words, sometimes a person has died, and it is not difficult to see this historically. A person who lived 2 or 3 centuries ago may have projected prejudice or a negative mental construct, and even today, this still creates victims. Someone who lived 1,000 or 2,000 years ago and created highly positive ideas, just as the Dhammapada itself says, that word which brings comfort to those who hear it, that word has been echoing for 2,000 years and still generates positive karma. Notice that a person who makes a mistake, according to Indian tradition, as well as in Buddhism and Hinduism, a person who makes a mistake because they copied your example, some of that karma is still yours. A person who does the right thing because they were inspired by your example, some of that karma is also yours. These ideas will remain echoing. Many times, we see people in the streets living out certain ideas without even knowing the name of the author. Sometimes we happen to know a little more. And you know, that was so and so. This person no longer even knows who originated that idea, yet they still live by it and claim it as their own. And it remains a source of many misunderstandings in today's world. So be mindful. Recognize that our ideas are greater than our lives. The fruits of our mental efforts last far longer than the fruits of our physical bodies, much longer. And they can bring proportionally much greater harm or benefit, even when we are no longer here. It's tough, but it's important to occasionally give our consciousness a wake-up call so that it realizes what is essential, what is real, and what we are truly sowing in the world. 42. Whatever the evil someone does to one they hate, or that two enemies do to each other, the greater evil is that caused by a misdirected mind. That is, a mind trapped in circular, negative thoughts, complexes, prejudices, and offenses. There is no enemy in the world who can harm you as much as this. It infiltrates your social relationships. It seeps into your professional actions. It infiltrates both your private and public moments, leaving devastation in its wake, causing harm throughout your life. No human being would be capable of doing this to you. To harm you so deeply, to the point of stealing the beauty of life from you, to the point of robbing you of your peace. A single thought is capable of doing this. There can be no worse enemy, nor better friend than a good thought, a positive mental framework, a guiding principle that leads you, your mental landscape. Continuing on, the 4th chapter, the last one we will discuss today, is about flowers, guilt, and emptiness. It primarily addresses the importance of allowing our best qualities to bloom while being mindful of the insects that may hinder us. Allowing nobility and beauty to flourish while being cautious of the insects, the passions, and excessive sensuality. A range of elements can lead us astray, always keeping in mind that we are in the Middle Ages, where things are not seen as inherently bad, but rather that everything must be in its proper place and measure. This is where human consciousness is born. Often, there are misunderstandings. I notice that sometimes people who read Nietzsche, for example, when he speaks of the Dionysian and the Apollonian, assume that the Dionysian means surrendering to passions and pleasures here below, and that the Apollonian. The idea is about unity. In reality, you will see that the true concept is about surrendering ourselves. Not the passions of the animal plane, but the passions of the soul above, which also exist. The soul also falls in love. It falls in love with grand ideas, with lofty goals. In other words, there are passions of the soul as well, not just those of the body. They are filtered through the Apollonian. In other words, this lower triangle of Dionysian duality will not produce a shattered, fragmented Dionysus, but rather an elevated Dionysus who generates the pleasures of the soul. In other words, reconciling the Dionysian with the Apollonian does not mean falling into matter or succumbing to instincts. One must know how to deal with human passions, which also exist, and with human pleasures, which also exist. And what about the pleasures of the animal plane? Well, some have their rightful time as well, but we must not become slaves to them. In other words, placing everything in its proper place is the Platonic concept of justice. Everything in its place. There is no evil in the world. In other words, this is not Puritanism, this is discernment. It is important to understand this. Now, verse 46. He who knows that this body is ephemeral like the foam of the waves, and illusory like a mirage, will deflect Mara's flowery arrow, sensuality, and, unaware by the king of death, will continue on the path. all the time realizing that what we take as absolute is transient. Notice that in contrast, consciousness is born. I always talk to you about this, which is the theory of impact. In contrast, between two colors, you perceive both. In contrast, between silence and sound, you perceive both silence and sound. In a flat, homogeneous world, there is no discernment. Consciousness does not arise. So, from time to time, we must confront the transient with the eternal, the fleeting with the enduring, so that we can assign the right value to things. There are very pleasant sensations, and in their moment, they are not bad at all. But making our life a mere accumulation of sensations, as people often say, what matters is a collection of moments. Be careful, because you might end up with a puzzle where nothing fits together. An accumulation of moments that all align in a single direction, that's fine. But if they are disconnected and linked only by sensuality, by uncontrolled passions, it can simply result in a wasteland, a scrapyard where nothing connects to anything and nothing is built. Verse 48, continuing in the same theme, states that he who, eager for desires, picks the flowers of passions, is surprised by death before satisfaction even comes. Because desires multiply. There is a theory here, a principle of this nature, as the Kybalion used to say. One desire aligns with another, and before long, there is an enormous offspring. They give rise to addiction. It is never satisfied. Before you can fulfill your last desire, you will have taken your final breath. Life is not enough for an insatiable fever of desires. And you think, well, one day I will do something meaningful, but for now, let me indulge in distractions. When you finally realize it, your life has been one great distraction. Life is very fleeting. Sometimes it is difficult to convey this idea to a young person. Someone around my age, in their 50s, has the impression that 20 or 30 years ago was just moments ago. Time is extremely fleeting. The only certain thing one can say about life is that it passes quickly. In other words, it is important for us to recognize and confront the lasting with the fleeting so that we can understand what truly deserves our attention and energy, and so that we do not lose ourselves in a world of trivialities. Let us not submerge ourselves in a world of ruins and superficialities, and become as frivolous and transient as they are, for we ultimately identify with that which we seek. Verse 49, let the wise man live in his village, just like the bee collects nectar, without damaging the color or fragrance of the flower. Do you realize that even this, which is harmony, relates to having a certain moderation in our fulfillment? That we may, like the bee, extract the nectar from the flower without harming it in any way its beauty remains intact. It does not become any less fragrant because we take its nectar. Our interaction with the world should not be one where we are always consumers and never givers. What do we offer to the world? I mentioned to you that rather unsettling mathematical equation, the amount of water we consume, the food we take from the earth, from animals, and what we give back to the earth. What do we add? How do we contribute with positive ideas, with the construction of meaningful things? What do we truly add? What is the balance of our lives? Are we merely great consumers, leaving nothing behind but depletion? A devastated land? We should have the ability to consume, yes, but only the minimum necessary, the amount required for a dignified life, so that we can recognize that we, too, are contributors, that we also add value to this world. I love that passage from Khalil Gibran's The Prophet, which I have mentioned so many times before. That when you sacrifice an animal or a plant for nourishment, you should say, look, the same knife that offers you up will one day offer me up as well. Both of us contribute to building something even greater in life. Both of us add to it. We will be nourishment for something much greater in the future. We contribute to life. I am not merely a consumer of your life. Your life will continue to live within me. And through my life, many others will live in the future. Imagine being able to say that. In other words, we have a relationship where we do not harm the flower that nourishes us. We are capable of leaving it intact while also spreading its pollen throughout the world. That is, we contribute, we make a difference. That would be the essence of life. In the end, that is what will remain. Well, verse 50. Do not concern yourselves with harsh words, failings, or the other's negligence, but be conscious of your own words, actions, and negligence. Once again, the old story of victimization. Let others do and say what they will. As for what depends on us, let us strive to set an example, to offer help. But we are particularly responsible for our own words and actions. That old phrase, which has become a cliché, is actually very true, everyone. Teaching happens through example. Sometimes, the way you interact with someone in an environment, such as the workplace, is far more transformative and impactful than giving a speech to that person. No one can stand speeches anymore. People need someone to prove that what they say is possible and to prove it through their own life. So, stop worrying so much whether about negative words or negative behaviors and start committing to being a force for good. Well, the world lacks virtue. If you have virtue, then the world already has virtue because you are part of the world. Fulfill within yourself what the world is lacking. It's difficult, and it may sound like just beautiful words, but if you persist little by little, over time you will find it within yourself. It's impossible that one day we won't pick up that old photo album, open it, and realize that we have changed. Not just physically, but that we have become more mature, more integral, more fraternal, and more aware of what we are doing in the world. It's impossible that only fashion changes while we remain the same inside. So, this is a fundamental element escaping victimization. Avoid seeking answers in others and instead take responsibility for life by doing our part. 51. Similar to beautiful colored flowers, but without fragrance, fruitless are the beautiful words of those who speak them but do not follow them. We've reached a point where nowadays it is difficult. Words have become so empty that it is hard to say to someone, in a sober and trustworthy way, I love you. Words have been worn out. Those who work in advertising know that today it is difficult to convince anyone of anything. No one believes when someone says, this product is good, I used it, because it's a game of masks, a farce. In other words, it is necessary to speak through your own life. Coherence is essential. And this coherence nourishes our soul and is the only way to inspire those who follow us. Now more than ever, we need coherence. The only way to deliver a powerful message to someone is by being deeply committed. This does not mean being infallible, but rather having the willingness to improve. In other words, I may make a mistake, but I will correct it as soon as I become aware of it. And with that, I will gradually build resilience against certain influences. This no longer affects me. Other challenges will arise in the future, but I will also learn how to guard myself against them. I will become increasingly resilient, until one day I will no longer stumble. But even now, I am already committed to that future day. In a way, that day is already here because I am dedicated to it. 54. The fragrance of flowers, sandalwood, jasmine or incense is not blown against the wind. But the fragrance of virtue surpasses the wind, reaching the ends of the world. In other words, a flower. Some have wonderful fragrances. I have here a night blooming jasmine. Its scent is marvelous. But if the wind comes and blows against it, it cannot overcome the wind. The fragrance is carried backward. The wind is capable of stopping the gentle aroma of a flower. Now, the aroma of virtue, I find it a very impressive thing. And how is that? 2,000 years ago, or more precisely, 2,600 years ago, we came to know the message of a Buddha. At a time when there were no means of communication, and in fact, the communication tools we have today have only really existed since the mid-20th century. Before that, we had very little. How did this message spread across the world? It originated in India 2,600 years ago. How did this message spread across the world? It is a fragrance that nothing and no one can stop. It seems that, even unconsciously, this fragrance is perceived by all human beings. When the life of the Buddha is recounted, it is said that, without knowing why, all of humanity feels a certain relief from its suffering. When a man attains enlightenment, in other words, the fragrance of virtue encounters no barriers capable of stopping it. And whether they are aware of it or not, whether they know where it came from or not, all of humanity benefits from it for a very long time. It is the greatest legacy we can leave for humanity. Even though we are not, and will not soon become, a Buddha in our own way, we can still leave a fragrance that spreads throughout the world and benefits as many people as possible. And finally, 58 and 59. Like the fragrant lily grows and blooms in the mud, by the roadside, the disciple of the Supreme Liberator shines, through purity and wisdom, among the blind crowd of this world. That is, for those who know the story of the Sermon of Benares, where an old woman with a small lamp, standing atop a mountain, witnesses a great storm extinguishing the torches of all the princes of the earth. But she, with her very small lamp, shields it with her own body. And even in the midst of the strongest winds, it is not extinguished because it is so small. And when absolute darkness falls, that small lamp can be seen from a great distance. You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hidden. In other words, when something beautiful awakens within us, it is something elevated, standing on a hill at the pinnacle of human potential. It is a light that, even if small, in moments of darkness, can illuminate from a great distance. Try turning off all the lights in your house and lighting a very small light, a tiny candle, a lighter, a small flame, and you will realize the power of illumination. The darker the world becomes, the more impact a small light can have. So, may we shine with purity and wisdom amidst the blind multitude of the world. May we be a single drop in an arid time. And this consists of being attentive, vigilant, controlling our mind, and remaining true to our identity. Well, this is the beginning of our journey through the Dhammapada. I hope you read these first 4 chapters, reflect on them, digest them, and walk with them. Throughout the day, invite a verse from the Dhammapada to spend the day with you. Reflect, delve deeper, digest so that you may extract some teaching that becomes engraved in your life. And we will continue next week with a few more chapters, starting from the 5th. Thank you very much.